Hey guys, this is chess coach Andrew Rankin. Welcome back to the series Buffing Your Black Repertoire. Today I want to show you guys a game that I played in a rapid chess tournament, which was a 15-10 time control, and my opponent was rated 2188, and that's his over the board rating. So, very strong player, but one mistake and you can punish it for the rest of the game. So we actually had 14 moves of opening theory. So the game went e4, c6, d4. I like how the computer says that c6 is an inaccuracy. Let me turn off the annotations. It's like the computer is trolling me by laughing at my opening repertoire. But c6, d4, d5, and then he plays the classical variation. So all of this is theory. I'm going to move through it relatively fast. But we should take here. The knight takes. Then we develop our bishop, attacking the knight. The knight moves back, attacking our bishop. We go bishop to g6. He goes knight to f3. And the idea is to go knight to e5 and then take the bishop. So in order to stop knight to e5, we play knight to d7. Now comes this h4, h5 shenanigans. So h4, h6, h5, bishop h7. Bishop d3, bishop takes, queen takes. And this actually looks really good for white, right? White's got this strong h-pawn, 2 knights developed, and the queen. And we spent 1, 2, 3 tempos not doing a whole lot with our light square bishop. But these pawns are all weak. And if white doesn't create significant counterplay, then white is going to be left with pawn weaknesses in an endgame. So Caro is oftentimes a very solid way to play, taking advantage of pawn weaknesses later in the game. So we have to play the move e6 here, and the idea is to allow the bishop to come out, because we meet the move bishop f4, which looks amazing for white, with queen to a5 check. And the idea is that he doesn't want to castle king side, and we're going to create weaknesses over here on the queen side where his king is going to be. And you'll see that this actually creates very fast counterplay for black. So the bishop drops back. And now we develop the bishop to b4. I actually didn't know how the game continues after bishop takes, queen takes. I wasn't entirely sure what you're supposed to do there. So I was a little afraid that he was going to take, that he didn't know what he was doing. But luckily he just played the main line, which is to play c3. Bishop drops back to e7. Pawn goes to c4, and now the queen drops back to c7. And you noticed he spent 2 moves with his bishop, and now his bishop is much worse on d2 than it is on f4. And we developed a dark square bishop and our queen to very strong squares. And after castles, look, our queen is now in line with his king. So this is how black likes to catch up in development. And we just continue with knight to f6, and my opponent plays king to b1, which makes a lot of sense. And we castle. So now the stage is really set for a battle. So our idea as black is obviously we're going to try and create open files against white's king as fast as possible. And white's strategy is to move this knight out of the way, prepare, or even sacrifice the g-pawn with g4. So if white wants to play a little slower, he can play rook to g1 and then g4, g5. Or white can sacrifice the pawn with a move like g4, knight takes, and then put the rook behind it and gain lots of tempos and lots of pressure on black's king. My opponent does a variation of that idea, which is moving the knight off of the g3 square and preparing to play g4. Now, if I take here, I think white's queen just takes back and is fine. And then if I play knight to f6, I don't know if we gained a whole lot. So I decided I think it's time to just attack white. And I actually set a little bait here, and my opponent fell for it. And it's amazing how immediately for the rest of the game, white is just punished. So I play the move b5, which looks a little bit crazy because we're just sacrificing a pawn, right? He's got 1, 2 attackers, and we only have 1 defender. But remember, when the kings are castled on opposite sides, you want to be the first to create an open file, and that's exactly what happens. So he takes on f6. I take back with the knight. That way I keep control of key squares like e4 and also g4. So pawn to g4 is never a big threat because I can take, and then I threaten to take on f2, which is a fork of all of his major pieces. And now he gets really greedy, and this is exactly what I was hoping for. So he plays pawn takes b5. I play pawn takes b5, and now he plays queen takes b5. And black just gets way too many tempo gaining moves. So first we play rook a to b8, attacking the queen. And he puts the queen on a5, and this is actually a big mistake. Now I couldn't decide here in the game whether I wanted to play rook to b6 and double up, but I didn't really like the idea of pinning my own rook to my queen, even though I can always play moves like rook to b2 check. But it just seemed a little double-edged, and so I just played queen to a7. Why not play very simply and simply threaten checkmate in one? So now my opponent plays bishop to c3, and this is actually -5 already. This position is horrendous for white, because his great bishop looking to sacrifice and open up my king is now very passive and simply defending the b2 pawn. And we continue to put pressure on his position by playing knight to e4. And we have the simple threat of taking here. He has to take with the queen because his b pawn is pinned. So then we would put more pressure on with rook f to c8. And you see our army is getting in very quickly. And I also have the simple threat of knight takes f2, which forks the two rooks. So he drops his rook over to c1. And I should really put the rook on the c file and just build up the pressure. But in a rapid tournament, sometimes playing a little bit more straightforward psychologically, I think, really puts more pressure on your opponent. So I decided to take the pawn. I do gain a tempo against the rook, and when he puts the rook on f1, I drop the knight back to e4. I really like that my queen guards the knight on e4. The knight threatens to go to all kinds of dangerous squares. For example, this comes with check. This is check, which would fork the rook and the king. This would fork the pawn and the rook, and my queen can always go here with check. But mainly the knight is just super well placed. And now my opponent decides that this threat on his king is too dangerous and plays the move b3. But you notice that he creates all these dark square weaknesses around his king, and what's left over is my dark square bishop. So I just bring my rook to the c file and put more pressure on now this less defended bishop. And he plays a losing move immediately. He plays rook f to e1. And I want you guys to pause your videos and find a very strong continuation for black here. Okay, if you need a little bit more time, go for it. But the best move here is actually to play bishop to d8. And the queen has to move, most likely to a3. And then this is just a hanging piece. But if you found a little bit more simple way to move forward, and this is the move that I played in the game, I just played knight takes bishop. And no matter if he takes back with the queen or with the rook, we have a bishop to b4, which pins or skewers or double attacks everything on this diagonal. So he took back with the rook. I played bishop to b4, which attacks the rook and his queen. He trades rooks. I take back. Now I have the control of the c file, which I'm very happy about. He moves his queen over to e5. I take his rook. He takes with the queen. And now the question is, how do we continue here? And I really liked the move queen to c6. And we're threatening queen infiltration here. And therefore, he has to move his queen to the less than optimal square of d2. And now we always have this check in our back pocket if we want it. But I don't think it does a whole lot. So I just played queen to d5. And I really liked this move for several reasons. One is that we're putting a lot of pressure on his king side. I mean, it's his queen side, but it's where his king is. We're pressuring the center pawn, so he can't move his knight like here, because then we can double up and either take the d pawn or take the knight, which is no longer defended by the pawn because the rook would be pinning the pawn to the queen. We also put a lot of pressure on the g pawn, and we're threatening to take the h pawn. So he decides to move his king forward, and I grab the h pawn. And I could really see my opponent's face that he was a bit downtrodden at this point, because he realized that his winning chances are almost, or I should even say his counterplay chances, not his winning chances, but his chances to create some sort of counterplay are almost entirely gone. But he does play the move a4, and I played the move a5, and looking back, I didn't really love this because he actually has a way to win this pawn. I thought that it would always be defended by my queen, but after knight to e5, this pawn actually ends up quite weak. And then he has two connected passed pawns, but they are also the guards in front of the king. So luckily we found a nice plan that made this not really a big deal, but I didn't like what happened next. So I moved my queen over to f5. I really thought this was a clever idea. So after queen takes a5, we would play queen to c2 check, and white is actually in a mating net. So it's mate in 11 here. Obviously, I didn't calculate that because I only had, I think, like 5 minutes left during the game. But I knew that when my queen got into c2, that this pawn, and his king, too many weaknesses. This pawn would probably fall. So that's why my opponent played knight to c4. And actually, it's quite clever because he has the simple threat of knight to d6, which forks my queen and my rook. So I decided to put the rook on the d file, which puts more pressure on this weak pawn. He takes with the knight, and now I centralize my queen to d5. He moves the knight back, and it's time for us to play with our pawns, because he's obviously going to push his pawns and try and make a queen. It's the only way to generate counterplay for him. And I have this pawn majority on my king side, and I don't really want to weaken my king with a move like f5, so I decided to just play the move e5. Notice he can't play knight takes because we can play queen takes, pawn takes, rook takes check, and this is completely winning for black. So he decides to just push a5. I played pawn takes on d4. I really liked to have a central pawn, and I didn't want to trade off queens yet because I wasn't entirely sure if one rook could stop a knight and two passed pawns with the king escorting them down. He pushed again, and now I thought this was really clever to stop the move pawn to a7, and I played the move pawn to d3. And after he played pawn to a7, which is a big mistake, and I'm wondering if you guys can find the next move. So pause your videos and find the strong move for black. If you need to, take some more time, but we have queen d4 check. And after he moves the king away, we pick up the a7 pawn, and now black is completely in the driver's seat. We have a really strong d pawn. His b pawn is weak, and I'm never going to be worried about him making a queen because the b pawn can't do it by itself. He decides to move the knight to e5 and put pressure on d3, but the game ends in two moves here. So we play queen to g1 check, the king steps forward to b2, and then queen to d4. And so the only way to save the knight is to play queen to c3, but then we would simply play queen takes, king takes, and then we push the pawn, and there's no way to stop us from making a new queen. So my opponent resigned after queen to d4, and I thought this was just a brilliant game from black. So we played 14 moves of opening theory. We gave our opponent a chance to grab a free pawn and fall for a much worse position where black has all the initiative. He didn't think for very long, and he went for this variation where he wins a pawn, and his greedy nature ended up being a quick demise. So yeah, I think his over-the-board rating, classical rating, is even higher, so he should be 2200, which should be master level strength. So I was really happy with this game, and I thought that I would share it with you guys. So I hope you guys enjoy that. Take care. Bye.